high return activities yield to high return results. Your KPIs should be on activities, proven activities at work. If you continue to do that over and over, the results will show up. You can't come to work and hope that the results are there. You have to come to work and put in the work.
Hello, I'm David Kain, host of the Kain Friends podcast, where we ask our guests to share thoughts and ideas on the automotive industry with focus on helping our viewers improve their business. Joining me today is Scott Falcone. Scott is the dealer and partner of World Hyundai and Matteson Auto Mall. For nearly 2 decades, Scott has helped build a culture centered on process, accountability, and continuous improvement, proving that long-term success isn't about chasing the latest trend, but about executing the fundamentals exceptionally well. One of Scott's guiding principles comes from the E-Myth by Michael Gerber. The quote goes, "Systems run the business, people run the systems." I love that. That philosophy has shaped both his leadership style and the success of his dealership. Scott, I'm going to bring you on stage now. Thank you for joining me. And if you would just introduce yourself to the audience, I'd sure appreciate it.
It's nice to see you, David.
Good to see you, Scott.
I'm Scott Falcone, the fortunate dealer operator at both of those stores and a used car store that we have as well in the Chicago market. We're on the just on the outskirts of the city.
Okay, that's a nice little town to be on the outskirts of. You might do a little pump into that market, would be my guess.
We do a mixed bag. We serve a lot of different books of business. So yeah, we're a little bit everywhere, and
Good.
plenty of dealers in our market to serve everybody. I think we've got about 25 or 26 of each in the market, so plenty of competition to keep you on your toes as well.
All right. So my guess is you grew up as a teenager saying, "I want to be in the car business." You went to university and you took car business classes. How did you get in the car business?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Let's see. No, I grew up with not enough money to go to college, was terrified of debt. So I decided to go into business for myself. And, when you're 18, 19 years old, you don't have a lot of skills at that time. And so I did the best that I could with what I had. And my first venture into entrepreneurship and ownership was owning a carpet cleaning company, which I did all through high school. And you can't do much in high school and previous to high school for work either. So I was an outstanding janitor, carpet cleaner, and I found out that I was a pretty good salesman when I was in customers' homes when they needed additional services and work done. And so I kind of leaned into sales, through that angle and had the business for quite some time. And sales was a path for me to I think build my confidence. I had a what I think was more of a bit of a false sense of confidence, maybe clever with words, but it, and that's kind of like, the show part of it, right? But deep down inside, I wondered that, and I said I need to, toughen up the real confidence. And I said, I think the way you do that is, you go sell something, and you get a lot of no's and a lot of rejections, and you learn how to get your skin tough and your attitude and everything else, thick. So I decided that whatever I was going to do, I was going to gravitate to selling, just to help me, really build that. And then I forgot all about it, and I just became, a salesman, and that was it. And so now it's more of a persona than anything. But it is a great tool to build your confidence. That's for sure. Whatever it is that you're selling out there, getting rejected no's and being able to bounce and, not take it personally. I think, is a great skill set for life.
Yeah, I can just imagine. So, did you immediately come out of your own business and find a dealer that was willing to let you put your selling skills?
It was a few years before I transitioned, and I started selling cars. I really, I hate to say I didn't need to, but I didn't need to make the shift, but I just felt like, that was the quintessential sales job, right? And if I was not done challenging myself to be good in some, place, that would be it. I think my first choice, I wanted to be in financial sales. I wanted to, you
Sure.
know, I was really fascinated and interested in it all through high school. But since I didn't go to college and I, didn't get an MBA, that was probably, not going to be my path. So, low barriers to entry. Thank goodness for the car business. It's a blessing and a curse, I think, for the industry. I love that. I always remain, I take the high road on that. We do let a lot of people in that we probably shouldn't, give a lot of people chances we probably shouldn't, but thank God that we do, because then there's those of us, who, got in and stayed in and hopefully, made the business better and made a good life. And so I love the fact that it is a low barrier to entry industry, but I did get a chance to sell cars and, I had a good level of success doing it and kind of looked around after I got comfortable and said, well, if that guy is doing this and making that much money in that role with a different business card, maybe I could just aspire to that would be fine. And so then I caught a lucky break. I get a promotion. I wind up in the finance department at another store and never, really appreciate that opportunity going back many years ago, 30 years ago, I guess it is. And then the next kind of step was, well, if this guy's doing that and, then the money would follow that too. And I thought, well, that would make better sense. So
Yeah.
level the next promotion. And then I caught a lucky break. Somebody connected me with a gentleman who wanted to sell a store. We put a 5-year deal together. And this is after only being in the business for about 6 or 6.5 years. So pretty fast track. Yeah, real lucky for sure. And it was a store in, just maybe one of the worst parts of Chicago and, looked like a mistake by anybody that you'd ask. But I knew we'd get the job done and I knew we had, that I had a good team that I could bring with. And so I saved everything. I took every penny that I had saved, from the business and I don't know how many, 0% credit cards I got myself into that had a 6-month window before they came due. And it all worked out. They all met all the obligations, grew, put my life savings in and then did it again and again until I was able to buy more of the store. And at some point, the discussion became, hey, this is kind of fun. Maybe we should be partners. And, look back and maybe I should have not, but we did. And so we've created some partnerships over time. We've gone different directions as well, but it was a great place to start. And so that's, how I segued in with the first store. It was a Chevy store and just the absolute, worst part of town you could be. And somehow we managed to figure out how to sell 300 cars a month and we did okay. Yeah.
Good for you. It is those kind of stories I think that are the backbone of the automotive industry is recognizing that, hey, you didn't have an easy path, but the memory that comes from those challenges is really what I'm trying to draw out of these kind of conversations because too many times we see in the modern work environment, if it doesn't come easy, people tend to give up. And when we opened up, I talked about your one of your favorite books, The E Myth. Let's talk a little bit about some of those underlying philosophies that you've got that you ask your team members to absorb into their psyche.
So the E-Myth is an important book for me that I read, probably 25 years ago ish. I've read it several times. I've read, he has some other books and I really did. It was an awakening on the importance of systems and procedures, right? And if you haven't read the book, I would suggest that everybody reads the book. Managers, owners alike should really spend some time inside of there because you're going to learn something from it. And McDonald's is referenced a lot, and I think the movie The Founder was a good depiction
Oh
of
yeah.
Michael Gerber's book as well. Because it was all about systems, so you could drop different people into the different positions. And I never really forgot that that we didn't have to hire. If we're going to use a successful fast food place, almost any that are succeeding today, they don't have a French fry manager. they have anybody that can go operate the system, right? The system is what functions, and the French fries come out every time. And, if we could emulate that in the industry, we'd be a better industry for it. And we can to a certain degree, right? I mean, there's processes. There are the 10 steps, to the sale that, while antiquated, there are some value in paying attention. It's a road. There can be numerous, deviations, but as long as you find the one that works for you and you stay with it, right? It's not every day we're just going to see what we feel like doing today. We do what we need to do today based on a successful history, a plan. And so that book really did help me. And I do, I reference it all the time. And I reference just that simple saying. And it's a good reminder that you shouldn't be out chasing, well, let me rephrase that. You should always chase talent. You should always find great talent, right? And drop them in wherever you can. But there are positions that you're not going to find superstars for. And that's when the system, becomes the superstar, and we can drop in average people into a great system and get great results. And I think that's the important part to get from that Michael Gerber's, kind of I mean, so.
Well, it wasn't always the case, but Hyundai and Kia have become quite the darlings of the automotive industry from a dealer standpoint. There's a lot of appreciation by consumers. And depending on how long you've been in it, you probably were one of those that had to craft, the reputation of that. So let's talk about in your stores, what's it like for the customer experience? And as things are shifting, we've got the new FTC compliance guidelines and a real push towards pricing transparency. What are the things that have changed over the years, and what are the things that you might regard as Falcone non-negotiables?
You get a lot there to unpack. When I think about, where the brands have come, when we acquired our Kia store, it was, certainly headed, up. The Hyundai store, quite some time ago, there still were quality challenges, there were design challenges, but they were making the shift there. And then, the design really, I think, took over, and the quality stayed the course. There were some other things that happened to other OEMs. When we think back to some of the wind, the tailwinds that, both of these manufacturers have experienced, they didn't experience, tsunamis that shut plants down, that, sent people into your showrooms, right? And so that was a script that nobody could have written as an OEM official. They had to answer the bell with quality and design and all that to retain those people, and they did, and they have. We didn't have, gas pedal acceleration and all the things like that. There was some timing things that people forget that happened 15 years ago ish, 15 years ago, that helped write that script. So it's great to be a dealer of each of these, and the products, outstanding. The customers love it. As far as what customers get from us, or what they see from us, about half of our business is subprime, and it always has been. It's a part of the industry that most dealers don't want anything to do with,
Yeah.
because it looks like work, and it is work. It's a lot of work, and that's where systems become so critical. That, I did learn that on, making, a guess or a mistake on inventory, and you're in a lot of trouble. The path to the sale, putting inventory on the street that you shouldn't have, cars on, deals that shouldn't have left the building until we were ready to leave the building. So all of those systems are non-negotiables for us, right? We adhere to a policy. We don't go outside of it, because we know what works, right?
Yeah.
You should remember, when you stick your hand in the fire, it's hot. There's just no reason to go and try it again. If there's anything, I guess, that I think my staff team, gets from me, it's, I'm okay with sticking my hand in the fire, because I'm a slow learner. And I'm getting, I am picking it up though, but I tend not to make the same mistake twice. And that's something that I think they see too. It's perfectly fine to make a mistake, and,
Mhm.
just remember that it hurt,
Yeah.
either physically or financially, and don't do it again. And then install it in your system, and it becomes law. And I think, because we do so much work for our customers in that regard, and I know you're familiar with how much goes into, every angle of that business, between
Yeah.
inventory, talent, bank relationships, everything. That's a monster to do it right. And it's a ton of work. And our customers see it and they realize it. We're there 4 hours and 5 hours together with them to try to help them, and following up the next day or 2 days later, and whatever the case may be, still going to work for them. They appreciate it. Not everybody. Some people
Yeah.
just think that that's perfectly normal, that you should spend all that time with them, to hope to God to get a car out for them to get them to work. But it translates over to all customers. I think it doesn't matter your background, your credit score, your ability or inability to buy a car. We work just as hard to ultimately solve a problem.
Yeah.
We've taken this approach in the last few years that when you look at a lot of common denominators, when you walk into a Hyundai store, a Kia store, Ford store, Chevy store, a Mazda store, most of the people aren't walking in there saying, "Hey, just won the lottery, just got an inheritance, and I'm here to select the car."
Yeah.
That's a different dealership they're going to. So they're there for, they're solving a problem. They've identified, an opportunity for them to say, "Hey, I think I'm going to be okay with this brand or this dealer." But ultimately, they're really there to have a problem solved.
Yeah.
Uh, well, my payments are too high, my interest rate's too high, my car has too many miles on it. I've had a lifestyle change. I filed bankruptcy. I went through a divorce. We have a bunch of new kids. We got rid of a bunch of kids. All these things that change in their life. Ultimately, they're solving problems. It's rare that somebody just, I don't know. I just felt like getting an extra car today. You know,
Yeah.
so you've really taken an approach to identify all these things in our selling process from the moment that customers walk in, through digital surveys that we take with them. We send them digital surveys up front so we can find out what some of their important components are to getting a car, so we can focus right in on solving their problems. The survey results have been amazing in helping us steer right to that, and customers are not seeing that anywhere else. So that's something that's setting us apart. So I think that our customers see the work that goes into the deal and they appreciate it, and we do a ton of repeats and referrals because of those things.
And what you refer to is the traditional worthy, credit type customer versus the subprime. People just don't realize that customer satisfaction means just paramount to you and your success. And in those relationships, literally sitting there and hearing a story as to why they need your assistance and things of that nature. I think prime credit customers don't often get that. Let's explore just a little bit something that is unique, and you mentioned it. So, we're used to the needs analysis, or the CNA or whatever, when a customer comes in, sits at the consultation table. But you mentioned you all do a survey, perhaps after a lead comes in, a call comes in, or just working with the guest. What do you go through during the survey?
Well, it's digital, and there's, I believe, 12 or 13 questions in there, and we also, after, and they get to score that question, and we've built this tool in house so that we can analyze it. There are questions that we know they're the highs and the lows, and the questions are set up to elicit kind of the negatives, because we know they're coming. So what is the problem, right? We're not leaning into the good stuff. We're leaning into the bad stuff. And so we get these great answers, great feedback. And then we also ask them to select from a list of profiles. Just kind of tell us a little bit who you are, check these things off. Oh, I'm a first time buyer. I'm a credit rebuilder. I'm a high mile to work driver, things like that. So now we know that your car has too many miles and you're a high mile to work driver. So we probably won't talk about leases when you get here. We're probably going to talk about, something else. And we're going to talk about warranty. We're going to talk about cost of ownership, gas mileage, and so on and so forth. And that's, been really beneficial. And we've recently hired someone. His title is applied AI engineer, software engineer.
I
And
love that.
he's taken the survey, and I'm kind of waiting for this day to come, because we have thousands of answers now, right? And so we spent some time on this, and and kind of came up with a propensity tool and a propensity score that is really shocking. So we
Wow.
now know that when they're done with the survey, what their propensity is. We've taken our sold log, then we've matched it up with the surveys and how they answered, and now we're not cherry picking, but we're prioritizing. So
Sure.
we see somebody, with this, 47% likelihood to buy a car based on everything we have, as high as 70% in some instances. It's unbelievable, um, how effective that is. And
Brilliant.
yeah, so
Yeah, well, don't give away your secrets. There might be somebody paying attention to what we're talking about.
I'll show you how to build it, right? Because you, you still got to do it, right?
Yeah. It's funny you say that. Years ago, I was in Dallas and I was working with a dealer, and I said, someone, not too far from you asked if I could help them with their digital training. And I said, "How do you feel about that?" He goes, "I don't care. They're not going to try as hard as we are. They're not going to do the work necessary." So I'd love to hear that confidence in you. Tell
You
us.
and the keys to the kingdom, and they still won't turn the ignition. It's,
So let's talk about success. So, some of the success is owning a couple of dealerships, but are there stories in your background that you're particularly proud of if you look at your team or you look at what you personally have done?
yeah, I mean, I really judge a lot of, what I've done by the team, quite honestly, right? Somebody had to stand there, in front of the parade on day one. That was me. And then they had to decide if they wanted to get in the parade in March and do whatever else you do in a parade. We've got a couple of examples of um, two general managers that we have. We have more than a general manager at each store for different segments of the business, and they were actually customers.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, they were friends, and one bought a car, the other one came and bought a car. Um, Convinced them they should sell cars. They love selling cars, and then they just grew through the ranks, and they've been there for over 20 years. You know,
Wow.
and I think that's a real prideful story for me. I'm really happy to see that. And we've got examples of, somebody coming from, the cashier department that we just recognized had, some skill sets, and, they're a general sales manager at one of the stores. And, the tenure that we have in our management staff, lots of people with 10 and 15 and 20 years who've been with us who didn't join as managers. Almost everybody joined as a salesperson or in some sort of a clerical administrative position. And we recognize that, or, in the service side, porters to advisors and so on and so forth and things like that. So I think that the systems really help that, right? Because now we can take these people and drop them into something that uh,
Yeah.
a path to success. I think that as culturally, they know that's what I believe in, and then they believe in it. And so, one person doesn't do this, but when the team is thinking along these lines, we're thinking about giving people opportunity and growing from within and having that farm system. So, those are certainly proud. And I have two boys in the business now. One is
Very
a
cool.
general manager at the Kia store. Another one just started selling cars, and he actually was able to take that path that you mentioned earlier, where you go to college and decide I'm gonna be a car. And he took that path. So he's a graduate of Northwood, and he's liking his first year selling cars. So those are some proud staff moments that I think of, and we're always on the lookout for that. And I think another um, example is, like the recent hire that I just mentioned. I would venture to guess of, 17, 18,000 franchise dealers. There's probably about 5 or 10 of those guys right now in the plan. Now there's going to be a lot more, as the future rolls out. But, we want one of this to solve the problems and capture the opportunities that are coming. So those are, I guess, a few examples.
That's so cool. And, being a dealer's kid, I can uh, meet with your son and kind of give him some insights. I have 5 brothers and 3 sisters, and we all grew up in the family business, so I
Yeah.
understand what your kids are going through. So, let's talk about, something we can't escape, and you've already alluded to it, technology and how it's shaped our business, how we're leaning into AI and stuff. Are there any partnerships that you feel particularly good about that you've seen companies work with you or introduce things to you that you maybe wouldn't have considered?
You know, unfortunately, I'd say they're few and far between. Right now what we're seeing is, you know, um, mediocrity wrapped in a relabeling of AI and, pretending that it's a shiny new package or, that the results are going to be different. And, dealers are, um, they ought to know better by now, right? I mean, at this point in time, you've been through this. If you've been through it, you've been doing this a while. You've seen what I would consider some watershed moments. The internet.
Yeah.
I mean, paid search. People have ignored it. They didn't get in the weeds. They didn't. This is your craft. You should hone your skill sets and at least have an understanding, as opposed to waiting for a vendor to show up in your dealership and ask you for $3,000 a month for something that you don't know what it is you're getting.
Yeah.
But you check the box and you said,
Yeah.
well, while we're doing AI or you know, we're on Google. I mean, when I think back to the stupid things that I used to hear, we don't have a lot of those vendors coming to us that, we're super going, wow, this is great. They're really going to change our business, which is why we've had to build a ton of our own. And that's what we've done. We've built our own. Now, we do have a relationship with Core AI, and Todd Smith. Todd's product has continued to evolve with his team. He's got a really good, smart team there. And we love to, brainstorm and offer suggestions and try to poke holes. And, they're always interested in learning and listening and making the product better. And that's going to be a beneficial product, once dealers understand what it really can do. And it's still in early stages, but it's something there. And then a company you're familiar with as well is Locum AI that I was how we met was just a little bit random. Salik, the founder, and I did a demo and really liked what I saw on the service side of it. I didn't think I could really pencil hard ROI, but understanding that, you know, high return activities yield to high return results. I felt that
Yeah.
the activities that the product did were going to yield high return results for us on the service side. And when I saw the technology behind it, outbound AI, which not too many people want to get into because of TCPA and a variety of other things. That's, not for the faint of heart. Inbound's real easy, right? It's a chatbot. It's a simple, story there. But when I saw the service side of it, my mind immediately ran to the sales side, and I figured that they didn't, see this opportunity, but you know, built an unsold desk log traffic outbound system, something that everybody ignores that we shouldn't ignore, right? You have all the in your store, you paid for them, you close at 25 or 30 or 35, whatever number you want to tell your
Yeah.
cat. And then all these people left, and we tell ourselves that we're following up with them. And all we're doing,
Yeah.
we're not calling the handful of customers that, we're waiting on money or something to happen or whatever to bring your trade back. And so this automated calling has been unbelievable, and the information that you find on why you missed a deal is amazing too. And people change their minds for the good. I've decided I'm going to go ahead and move forward, and this AI agent got that information and sent it to us immediately, and they weren't on our list necessarily, and now they're on the list. That when I found out we could build that, that was great, and that's really making, some super impact. That's gonna make an impact for a lot of dealers. Full transparency, I liked the product so much when I saw it that, they were raising money, and I became an investor in the company, because I believe in the product, and I enjoy, being an advisor to help get this thing going in the direction, to help other dealers. So, that's
Mhm.
a vendor. And then, like I said, we build our own stuff, is what we've had to do.
That's so cool, and, particularly adding on the new employee and having opportunities to interact with Todd Smith and Salik and people who are putting it out there, and I'm grateful that you were transparent about it, but the fact of the matter is that enhances the value of the company, when you have somebody who's willing to experiment, if you will. And I've got a friend who owns a company who said all of these technology companies are experimenting on us. And who better to make that call than the principal of a dealership to say, "Hey, I like this product enough, but let's tweak this or let's tweak that." It ends up being a benefit to everybody who participates with the tool.
It's so simple, so basic, and so true, and it's amazing how many dealers don't like that concept. I'm
Yeah.
sure you've seen that, right? Oh, since there's a dealer involved, and all of a sudden it becomes, tainted. Like I don't understand. It's really odd, but it is what it is, and I can't help those guys figure it out for themselves. But yeah, that's the goal. I mean, I wouldn't throw my time and money into something like that if I really didn't think it was going to be beneficial. And it's going to be dealers that get on it. They're really happy as it's evolved. And I
That's
think
so cool.
I think that with the you know I pay a lot of attention to what's being built and what's new and what's coming on. And there are a lot of dealers, myself included, who are launching things um, for other dealers in
Yeah.
this space. And I'm happy about it because to your point, these are guys that are probably not experimenting, or they've experimented already on themselves, which is what we've done, right? We were our own petri dish for a couple of years, building all of these tools and products that we're about to have. And they've done the same thing.
Yeah.
They feel good about it now. They're going to market. Why wouldn't I want to support them? Why wouldn't I want to make my store better, on a dealer owned product or a dealer invested product? It
Yeah.
makes perfect sense.
Yeah, there's no question. So let's imagine. So in our household, every breakfast, lunch, and dinner when we were with our dad became a sales meeting, if you would. And every day we'd always say, "Hey, did you sell any cars today, Dad?" Or how was business? If you were talking to a younger Scott, and you kind of are with your kids in the business, what advice would you give yourself based on where you've come from and what you think others could benefit from in the future?
If this was a career you were thinking about getting into, or I mean, I guess almost anything, my advice would be is find mentors at a young age.
Yeah,
I think it's so easy to do today, so much easier. When we were kids, you might have had, your dad was your mentor, and maybe you look back and you go, well, he was a good mentor in this area, but maybe not in that one, right? I mean, that happens, and or your grandfather or whomever, your grandmother, and so on. But I find mentors that that align with who you want to be, and leverage them and use them. Don't be afraid to fail, and your mentor will tell you that. And I really didn't have anybody, so my learning curve was really slow. It was expensive. It was slow, which is why I again adhere to staying the course. Once we have discovered something that works, we turn it into law. We just we baked a really good cake, and we're not going to change the recipe. Now, do we have an experimental kitchen? Yep. And that's where we change the recipes and we bake it and we try it ourselves. And if it's better, then we install it right in the main bakery. And then we deliver that. And that's what the customers that get then. And that becomes a new system for us. And I think that mentorship, offers so much, to young kids. And, it's something that I certainly enjoy doing with my kids and their friends, and hanging around. And, I like being around youthful people. And it doesn't necessarily mean calendar. It just means, your level of enthusiasm for life, your level of enthusiasm for growing. And that would be something else I would tell young people is, you cannot stop growing at any age. Just getting stale, going sideways in business is not a direction.
yeah,
It's because somebody else is going up, right? And therefore you're going down, whether you realize it
yeah.
or not. You're headed in the wrong direction. So, you know, constant learning, just, be a lifelong student is would be the other advice that I would give to kids.
God, good advice. We're not necessarily having the toughest year, but we're also in a fits and starts type of environment right now. Um, can you leave us with some guidance for those who are listening and watching to kind of let them know, how your mind looks at a year like 2026, and how do we take the middle of the year and make the rest of it really strong?
I think if you stick with blocking and tackling and a foundation for business, the results are going to speak for themselves. And you don't need to turn on, any TVs to find out what's going on in automotive or in the world. Where again, high return activities yield to high return results. You should your KPIs should be on activities, proven activities at work. If you continue to do that over and over, the results will show up, right? You can't come to work and hope that the results are there. You have to come to work and put in the work, right?
Yeah.
Perfect practice makes perfect, and you need to continue. You need
Oh,
to do
yeah.
that every day. And if you do that enough, the results will just show up, and then you start massaging it a little bit to get better results. So I don't think that every month, should be measured by, ultimately you have to keep score. That's what we do. Um, but I will say that owners and general managers and managers should be more aligned in the type of score you keep, because all too often we fall into way too many OEM scorecards, right? Traps for,
Yes.
how many, just simply that. Well, at what margin, there's just too many questions, that are variables to plug into that. What you should be measuring your success on is things like net to sales, quite honestly. And I know you're an NCM member and part of the organization. And I've been involved in 20 groups on and off for almost 20 years. And I love the metrics that are in there that you can pick out and look at, and then you can work backwards to improving the activities to get those. And when I see us succeeding, and being on that left side of the book consistently, and I know that it's from the activities. And so those are actually more of the metrics that I'm proud of, or that I chase, right? I'm looking at, my net to sales. And if we happen to be, number one in Chicago, that's great. If we happen to be number one in the region, that's just the result of our activities. And, if our net to gross is 45 and 50%, then I know we're controlling expenses. I know we have gross. And so, those are the type of KPIs and the things you should be looking at, whether it's the beginning of the year, the middle of the year. Stay the course on your activities, and the results, should follow.
God, sound advice from Scott Falcone. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. Some wonderful takeaways for the audience. We do appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you down the road.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. And thanks again for joining us here on this latest episode of Kain and Friends. We'll see you next time. Bye now.